Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and you are joining me today for another episode of Crime Writers of Canada's podcast, where we discuss crime fiction from coast to coast. And every once in a while, and some say not often enough, we also speak to people who write nonfiction. And this is one of the occasions. This is Nate Hendley. How are you today, Nate?
I'm well. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm good too. Thank you. The reason we are chatting is because Nate has been nominated for a Brass Knuckle Award for Best Nonfiction Crime Book, sponsored by David Reed Simpson Law Firm in Hamilton, for his book Atrocity on the Atlantic: Attack on a Hospital Ship During the Great War, published by Dundurn Press. A little bit about Nate is he's a Toronto-based journalist and author. His work has appeared in the National Post, Maclean's magazines, and numerous trade and business publications. He has also written scripts for podcasts, featured articles for the website TV Ontario, and several books primarily in the true crime genre. Nate's last book, The Beatle Bandit, won the Crime Writers of Canada Award for Excellence of Nonfiction in 2022 and was nominated for a Heritage Toronto 2022 Book Award. Today we'll be talking about his latest book, Atrocity on the Atlantic: Attack on a Hospital Ship During the Great War, which was published in 2024 by Dundurn Press. I always ask nonfiction writers this. I can't help myself. It's almost like an elevator pitch. Can you tell me about your book and also what inspired you to write it?
Sure. My book is about Canadian hospital ship Landovery Castle. And this was a ship that transported badly wounded men from Great Britain back to Canada for long recuperation during the First World War. On June 27th, 1918, it was torpedoed off the coast of Ireland without warning. This was a violation of the Hague Conventions, which stipulated that hospital ships are supposed to be off limits. You can search them, you can stop them, you can't sink them. So after the ship was sunk, the captain of the submarine proceeded to try to murder all the survivors. And that's kind of the nutshell version. One lifeboat got away, and this became a worldwide sort of outrage.
And what inspired you to write this one?
I was inspired to write it simply by the fact, well, a few things. Number one, no one had written a complete book about this story. It had sort of, this whole case had kind of gone down the memory hole. Everyone's familiar with the Lusitania, which was a British
Mhm.
passenger liner with American passengers, torpedoed off the Irish coast by a German submarine, 1915. This led to the US joining the First World War. Everyone's familiar with that case. No one has heard of the Landovery Castle. And at first, I thought this might make an interesting magazine article, but the more I dug into it, I didn't realize that this had inspired this incredible legal precedent that guided the Nuremberg trials during the Second World War and has repercussions on international law even today and by our basic understanding of what constitutes a war crime. So that's what made me decide to write this book, that there was just so much there. It's not just a shameful attack on a hospital ship, of which there were several, unfortunately, in the First World War. It goes into a lot more detail about the what came next, the legal ramifications of this attack.
So far, I've just read the beginning of the book, so which goes over sort of the details of the attack,
Mhm.
and it was horrible,
Yes.
obviously. But I'm not saying too much, but initially there were quite a lot of survivors who got out in lifeboats,
Mhm.
and the U-boat just terrorized them, right? They kept on
Yes.
interviewing them and trying, like, there was a
Mhm.
reason why. Um,
Yes. Without getting too much into the weeds, this is the late stage of the First World War, which is just an incredible descent into brutality. We've seen poison gas, flamethrowers, machine guns mowing down just line after line of men. So this is a brutal conflict.
mhm.
And by this point in the war, Germany is on the verge of losing. And it has really sort of taken the gloves off its U boat fleet. One of Germany's most effective weapons in the war are its submarines, which it uses to sink Allied merchant ships and warships. And by this point in the war, Germany is convinced that the Allies are abusing treaty treaty privileges and
Mhm.
putting munitions on hospital ships, putting soldiers on hospital ships. And they have this bizarre belief that American pilots are being smuggled into Europe on hospital ships, which is complete nonsense, but this is what they believe. And so, after sinking the Landovery Castle, as you mentioned, there are numerous survivors, and the submarine intercepts them. The submarine is on the surface by this point and interrogates people one by one, demanding, you're an American flight officer. And they're like, well, no, what are you talking about? After interrogating enough prisoners, the sub commander realizes he's made a huge mistake. There are no American pilots on board. He has just violated the Hague Conventions, and he's in deep trouble. I should mention that the Germany by this point has carved out an exemption for their own submarine fleet. They allow them to attack hospital ships, but only in certain areas, Mediterranean Sea and basically the English Channel. And the Landover Castle is nowhere near these sites, so there's no justification at all for this attack, which leads the captain of the sub to decide to start shelling the lifeboats and trying to kill all the survivors so no one can witness this war crime. He succeeds in killing just about everybody except one lifeboat with 24 survivors, only 6 of whom are Canadian, and the rest are a British crew, managed to escape, and they're the ones who tell the story and just shock the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating because he almost got away with it, right?
Very close, very
Panzig,
close.
like if he had gotten that one last boat, and they
Mm-hmm.
only survived because it was dark, right?
Correct. That the ship had a telegraph equipment. By this point, you had what's called wireless telegraphy, so ships could communicate with land or over Morse code. But that equipment had been damaged in the torpedo blast. They're in the middle of nowhere. Radar is not a thing yet, so no one knows they've been hit except the people on the boat. So if they had succeeded in killing all the survivors, it would just be a mystery as to what happened to the Landovery Castle, and they would just write it off as a tragedy at sea. Who knows what happened?
Um, Another portion of the book that I very much enjoy is you are telling the story from both sides.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And you do say that, we often hear this, that sailors are very brave people. Um,
mm-hmm.
I'm thinking while reading it, more so than ever, maybe now, because the submarine is a relatively new invention and a new war
Yes.
machine, but it was
Mm-hmm.
terrifying and very efficient. I mean, you say how this U-boat 86, this is just
Mm-hmm.
one of the boats it
Yes.
shot down. And you wouldn't even know it was coming, right? It happened at night. They were just torpedoed. Could you tell us a little bit about this brand new technology of the U-boat?
Sure.
Because it's different than what our perceptions of what it is now.
Of course. Of course. Submarines had been more or less introduced into warfare around the time of the U.S. Civil War. They had some prototype things.
Hmm.
And by 1914, Germany has really taken a serious look at these new weapons of war. Other countries kind of treat them as kind of novelties. And a little explanation, which is a bit confusing. Everyone calls these submarines, but they don't travel submerged very much. They travel on the surface most of the time. And this is because of their engines, that on the surface, they use diesel engines, which are fast, very long range, like thousands of miles, but they emit fumes and they suck in oxygen. So you can't use them underwater. Underwater, they switch to electric batteries, which have very limited range and are very slow. So they try to avoid going underwater as much as possible, which is a bit of irony given that we consider these submarines. But they were unleashed, and very quickly in the war, people realize their potential. There's this notorious incident in the summer, right after the war begins. 3 British cruisers are on patrol, and one after another, they're sunk by a single U boat. So, over 1,000 British sailors are killed in this incident, and U boats just prove their worth. That anyone who thought these were just novelties suddenly realizes these are potentially war winning weapons. Germany starts building a lot more of them, as I mentioned, they had the range to go all the way around the world pretty well, like thousands and
Mhm.
thousands of miles. Winston Churchill in the Second World War said that the only thing that really, really frightened him was the U-boat menace. That he wasn't, he figured that England could handle the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, the German Army. But the one thing that really threatened England's lifelines were the U-boat fleets. As you mentioned, they were stealthy. Sonar didn't exist at the time, so ships would have no warning that these were approaching. And they would suddenly, usually they would attack underwater, although sometimes they would surface, approach a ship, and at the start of the war, they'd actually give a warning shot and say, if it's a merchant ship, they'd say, okay, we'll give you some time to leave the ship on lifeboats, and then we're going to sink you. And they'd use its deck cannon to fire shots
Mhm.
below the water level. So there was a little hint of, I hate to say chivalry, but at the start of the war, it wasn't quite as brutal as it became. So these are absolutely nasty weapons, and Germany definitely has an edge in terms of U-boat technology.
The book also goes into the trials of what happens to the sailors of U-boat 86. Um,
Correct.
I would imagine, I haven't got to that point of the book yet. I would imagine there's going to be heads on spikes and war tribunals, and it's not going to go well for Uber Lieutenant Panzig. Again, don't tell us too much, but what can you tell us?
Well, what I can tell you is one of the things that inspired me to write the book was the discovery of something called the Leipzig war crime trials. And these were war crime trials after the First World War. Everyone's heard of the Nuremberg trials after World War II, but there were
Hmm.
war crime trials after World War One. One of the reasons you don't hear about it is they were much smaller scale and they didn't go very well. For a variety of reasons, Germany hosted the trials in Leipzig before its Supreme Court and handled both the defense and the prosecution. The Allies provided witnesses, lists, etc. Less than 20 people were prosecuted, and one of the cases involved the Landovery Castle. Captain Patzig of U-boat 86 actually couldn't be arrested because he had taken off after the war to his hometown of Danzig, which is now it's being under the jurisdiction of the League of Nations, which is this post-war thing like the UN. And basically, it means German and Allied officials can't arrest him. So what they do is they arrest two lieutenants who helped him shell the lifeboats. And I will be very quick, but the judges in the case, German judges, made this apocal ruling that obeying orders is not a defense for committing illegal acts in wartime.
Oh, wow.
And that became the crux of the Nuremberg trials in World War II. Every Nazi on the stand said, I was just following orders. And they
Hmm.
said, no, we now have a precedent set by a German court in 1921 involving this Canadian case. And it says that just because you obey an order, it doesn't mean you're not culpable for committing a terrible act. So that was incredibly significant. And it was another reason I decided to write the book. There's more details about the trials and other aspects of the legal issues. But even today, um, those principles, that principle is still enshrined in the International Criminal Court, which prosecutes war criminals from around the world. And in their very constitution, it says that obedience to orders is not legitimate defense. It is a mitigation in sentencing, but that's it. You can't just expect to get acquitted by saying, oh, I just obeyed orders. So that was a huge part of why I decided to write this book, just to say that this incredibly important legal principle derived from a case involving a Canadian ship, and no one's ever heard of it.
Wow. Fascinating. I don't want to say something good came from it, but maybe that's the right thing to say. Like at
It's
least something changed because
correct.
of it.
Correct. It, as I said, it didn't end war crimes. Still terrible things happen around the world, but it gave us a template to identify war crime and to identify who commits them. And it's not just the man at the top anymore, but anyone, down the chain who agrees to an incredibly egregious act. If they're told, okay, go throw those grenades in an orphanage or something. If it's such a blatant violation of international law, you can be held culpable even if you didn't give the order. You were just following a command. You can still be held responsible, and that is an incredibly important principle.
Wow. I'm learning so much today, Nate. Thank
Thank you.
you. The one compliment I want to give you, though, is it's very accessible.
Thank you.
I'm reading The Right Age, and just like your other books, you tell a story which is has the entertainment value of, let's say, fiction, but we're learning things, and a piece of history that you said I never heard about. I mean, I'm not
That's right.
on top of every event in World War One and Two, but I never heard of this story before, and I'm surprised. Without saying too much, is because there's a whole chapter devoted to this. But why did this become like this should be Canadian history, but it's
Mhm.
lost on most of us? And you have, I guess, theories and reasons why this happened.
Correct.
Again, don't tell us too much.
I won't give away too much, but one of the main reasons is simply this happened very late in the war, that the war ended within a few months of the Landovery Castle sinking. So they didn't really have a lot of time to use this for propaganda. Whereas the Lusitania, the British liner torpedoed by U boat, was sunk in 1915. So they had years to turn this into a cause celeb and make posters about this and films and all sorts of things. Um, the other issue that I mentioned, and I again won't explain everything, but there's such a thing as what I call tragedy overload,
Mm,
which is the human mind. You can only process so much horror that everyone remembers the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Very little has been written or people remember about the firebombing of Tokyo by conventional planes that same year. Some would argue was even more devastating than the atomic bombings, but it's sort of disappeared from memory. In Canada, we tend to sort of focus on the Halifax explosion, which
yeah.
happened only a few months before the loose of the Landovery Castle sinking. I don't want to denigrate that because it was the most horrific explosion prior to atomic power. Um, but that really has sort of become the wartime tragedy Canadians remember. And there's, in fact, a book that says something along the lines of Canada's worst disaster of World War One or something like that.
Mhm.
And there's sort of an element of heroism in the Halifax explosion that thousands of people came together to help. You had trainloads of doctors from New England come to assist people. The whole community sort of came together. There is this sort of element of this awful thing happened, but we survived. We came together. Landovery Castle lacks that kind of glory. It's really a sad, dismal story, and for this and other reasons, it sort of disappeared from memory.
Well, then I'm going to thank you for reminding us. One thing I've always, I don't know what the right word is, admired, maybe is the right word, is you hustle. I am always seeing you giving talks and
Mhm.
speeches throughout Toronto, and I see them on Facebook, and it seems like you do at least one a month.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's a very efficient way of selling books,
Yes.
getting your name out there, but it's not for everyone. So
No.
I would recommend people do it, but do you have any like, I don't know, tips, advice?
Sure. Well, a couple quick things. I've quickly learned when I've been um, writing books for almost 20 years, and I very quickly learned that if you want to make any money at all from books in Canada, you can't just rely on royalties. You have to do an extra hustle, which means generally live presentations. They're not for everyone. As you said, if you are very shy or you hate public speaking, I would recommend not doing them or doing them in very small doses. I happen to enjoy public speaking. I also work at home, so it gets me a chance to get out of my apartment and meet people. So I enjoy it, and I make a whole thing. I try to make it I hate to use the word show because I'm talking about a very serious
Mhm.
topic, but I have a PowerPoint presentation to accompany my talk. I rehearse my talks. And Toronto Public Library has been very helpful in hosting some of my presentations. You can actually approach them with proposals saying, I'd like to do a presentation on XYZ, and you charge a fee. It's the other thing. You can say, I'd like to charge, $150 per presentation, or 1,000 or a million or whatever. And I always ask for the right to sell books. And again, this is
Yeah.
this is another thing, little hustle information. I use an app on my phone called Square, little ad blurb there, because I find most people don't carry cash anymore. So if you want to
Mhm.
sell books, you have to be able to take credit cards, and unless you want to carry some big cash register with you, you've got to have some system to do that. So there are apps now that allow you to just tap your phone and take a credit card. I use those, and it's been extremely effective. I order books from the publisher, I sell them at a little higher price. Um, I find it extremely effective, and I actually have gained some new book material through presentations. My book, The Beatle Bandit, was inspired after a chap named Paul Truster, lovely guy, approached me at a book reading for a totally different topic
Mhm.
and said, Hey, I've got this story, would you like to talk about it? And I said, Sure. And we talked about it, and it became a book, which, as you mentioned, won an award. So I really enjoy doing these sort of hustles, or whatever you want to call it. I try to do as many interviews as I can, podcast interviews. Um, I find it's just part of the business that obviously I don't write books to make a vast fortune. Very few people in Canada do, unless you're, at the Margaret Atwood type level. Although, not to say that she's writing books to make a fortune. Um, but I find that this is one way of making a bit of money. And when I do my income taxes, I think about a fifth of my total income last year came from presentations and book sales. So it's a substantive chunk now.
Mhm.
And it's the sort of thing I'd love to keep doing long past retirement, like as long as I'm able to stand and talk, I'm happy to keep giving presentations.
Um, I got to ask then, what's the next thing that's inspiring you?
Okay. I do have a
Tell us.
book project for Dundurn Press. I can't give away too many details. One of my little idiosyncrasies is that I am somewhat obsessively secretive about book projects until it is literally published. My very first book, I didn't bother telling my family until I literally showed it to them. I think I said something like, Hey, mom, you reading any good books lately? How about this one? And I handed her a copy. She goes, Oh, who wrote this? And I said, Oh, I did. Um, True story. I just obsessively secretive about that. So I won't give away too many details. Other than that, it is another nonfiction about a family of counterfeiters that operated in Canada and the US in the 19th century. And the book also covers the origins of the Secret Service in the US, which was founded not to protect politicians, but to protect the money supply, and
Hmm.
something called the Dominion Police in Canada, who also investigated counterfeiting. So that's what I'm working on.
Hey,
Um,
excellent. You told me more than I thought you were going to tell me.
well, yeah,
Well, you're going to have to keep people waiting.
okay.
I tell everyone I don't know the winners of who won each category.
Mhm.
I'm so happy that three of the people in your group for the Brass Knuckles are members of Crime Writers of Canada. So I'm
Mhm.
equally cheering for all of you, and good
Great.
luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate this opportunity, Eric. And I think it's very good, by the way, what you're doing, just interviewing all the nominees. I think that's wonderful. So thanks.